You didn't actually invite him, did you? A guest murmured, eyes locked on the man stepping into the church, his suit threadbare. His shoes scuffed his face lined with years of hardship. The bride saw him and instantly gathered her dress, rushing past the stunned crowd without hesitation. As she wrapped her arms around the old man, a ripple of confusion swept through the pews. Whispers turned to silence. Then the church doors burst open again. 12 Marines in full-dress blues marched in boots sharp against the floor metals, gleaming faces solemn. They stopped at the bride's side and, in one synchronized motion, they raised their hands in salute. Not to a general, not to a politician, but to the woman who had fed a forgotten soldier for 6 quiet years. Clara Bennett wasn't someone who sought attention. She never filled a room with loud stories or dramatic flair. Instead, she moved through life quietly, like the steady rhythm of morning rain, on a roof comforting, consistent, and easily overlooked. She grew up in a modest house on the outskirts of Ashland, Oregon, a small town tucked into the embrace of the Rogue Valley. Her childhood home always smelled of warm tea and old books. Her father, Gerald Bennett, was a Gulf War veteran with eyes that seemed to carry a distant horizon, and her mother, Linda, was a hospice nurse who had the rare gift of making dying patients feel alive until the end. Clara adored them both, but life, as she would learn too early, has a cruel way of folding in on itself. When Clara was just 11, her father, once the strong, dependable man who taught her how to ride a bike and polish shoes the proper way, began to change. He grew quieter, jumpy. Nights were restless, mornings hollow. PTSD, a term Clara only vaguely understood back then, slowly claimed the man who had once stood so tall in uniform. One quiet morning in early spring, he simply didn't come home from his walk. They found him near the river, his old boots neatly placed beside him, his dog tags resting atop a folded note no one except Linda ever read. Clara didn't ask. Her mother never explained. But something unspoken passed between them in the months that followed, a shared understanding that pain often hides in silence, that some people walk the world invisible, carrying weights no one sees. From then on, Clara noticed people differently. She paid attention to the man who swept the diner floors, long after closing, the woman at the laundromat, who folded clothes with hands too tired for her age, and the veterans at the bus stop who flinched when engines backfired. At 17, Clara began baking. At first, it was therapy, her way of creating something she could control, something that brought joy. By 19, it became a calling. She enrolled in a local culinary program and took a part-time job at Morning Rise, a small-town bakery known for its flaky croissants and sunlit front windows. Within a few years, she became the head baker, arriving long before sunrise, her apron dusted in flour before most people's alarms went off. For the town, Clara was the girl with the golden touch. Her pastries sold out before noon, her coffee blends had regulars lining up at 6 a.m., and her peach muffins won a local food festival 3 years in a row. But few knew the version of Clara who slipped out the bakery's back door every morning at 5:15 a.m., carrying a warm breakfast wrapped in wax paper and a cup of freshly brewed coffee. She would walk past the alley across the street and place the bundle gently on the bench next to the bus stop. It was always for the same man. No one knew his name. He was older, likely in his 70s, with thinning silver hair and a gray coat that had clearly seen too many winters. He never begged, never spoke, never made eye contact. He just sat quiet, still, and somehow always there. Clara never approached him. She never asked questions. Her routine became a quiet ritual. Some mornings she left a handwritten note tucked beneath the muffin, wishing you warmth. Hope you slept okay. The cinnamon rolls are extra soft today. She never signed her name. Most of the bakery staff didn't notice. A few rolled their eyes when they caught her wrapping the extra pastries. One newer employee once scoffed, "You know he's probably not even homeless. Could just be gaming you." But Clara didn't mind. She wasn't doing it for recognition. In fact, she never once mentioned it to anyone, not even Nathan, her fiancé, and a firefighter with his own quiet code of service. Like Clara, he understood that the deepest kind of dignity often comes without applause. For 6 years through winter, snow and summer heat, Clara fed the same silent man, never expecting thanks, never needing a name, just trusting that kindness, like baking, rises best in warmth and patience. She didn't know his past, didn't need to. All she saw was someone the world had forgotten, just as the world had once overlooked her father's silent struggle. And in that quiet exchange between pastry and presents, between giver and receiver, Clara felt a small piece of healing pass between them both. Every morning before the sun lit up the town of Ashland, Clara Bennett stepped into the soft hum of her bakery kitchen, tied her flour-dusted apron, and turned on the ovens like clockwork. The world hadn't woken up yet, not the traffic, not the postman, not even the robins perched on the bakery's rain gutters. But Clara had. She always did. By 5:00 a.m., the first trays of croissants would begin to rise, their buttery scent mingling with freshly brewed coffee. Clara moved with muscle memory, knead, fold, sprinkle, bake, her hands working with quiet purpose. Yet while most customers assumed her gift was in the golden crust of her pastries, the real magic was in what she did before any of them arrived. At 5:15 sharp, Clara would wrap a warm pastry in parchment paper, sometimes a muffin, sometimes a slice of quiche, and pour exactly 12 ounces of coffee into a biodegradable cup. She didn't add sugar unless it was a Friday. For some reason, she always added sugar on Fridays. She'd slip out the back door, walk 2 blocks, and place the food on the wooden bench next to the bus stop. On colder days, she left an extra napkin. On windy ones, she weighed the note down with a smooth stone she kept in her pocket just for that purpose. And always, always, there was a handwritten message. Wishing you strength today. Hope this brings a little light. Still here, still baking. The man who received them never spoke. He only nodded sometimes, eyes soft but distant, his frame stooped beneath a weathered coat that no longer kept out the wind. Clara didn't need conversation. She needed continuity, and he gave her that just by showing up. But in a small town, even the quietest acts don't go unnoticed forever. It began with a whisper from a coworker named Melissa, who had joined the bakery 3 months earlier. She had sharp eyes and sharper opinions. One morning, after noticing Clara return through the back door empty-handed, she nudged another employee and muttered, "She's feeding that same guy again. You know, he never even says thank you." Another morning, Melissa said it loud enough for a customer to hear, "We're probably the only bakery in town giving out free breakfast to the homeless, like it's a loyalty program." The customer chuckled. Clara didn't. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just wiped her hands on her apron and went back to glazing scones. But the words stayed with her, not because she cared what Melissa thought, but because they echoed something deeper, a society that often views kindness as naivety. A few weeks later, the bakery's new manager, Kyle, requested a private meeting. He was polite but rehearsed, the kind of man who measured everything in profit margins and Yelp reviews. "I've been meaning to bring this up," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "Clara, your work here is exceptional, but we've had some customer feedback. One woman said she felt uncomfortable seeing a homeless man nearby every morning." He paused to let the words settle, as if he expected her to nod in agreement. "Your generosity is admirable," he continued, "but maybe it would be better, safer, even for everyone, if we directed our charity to a proper shelter. Something more structured." Clara simply smiled and said she understood. Then she began coming in 15 minutes earlier, so her deliveries were done before the others arrived. If they wanted invisible, she could give them invisible. But she would not stop, because Clara didn't just see a man in a tattered coat, she saw the echo of her father. She saw years of pain compressed into silence, dignity, still flickering behind tired eyes. She saw someone the world had labeled as less than, and she refused to treat him that way. What others viewed as pity, Clara knew to be respect. That's why even on the days she was running late, even when she had wedding planning to do, or a fever, she refused to acknowledge she still left that breakfast. And the notes kept coming, soft, small lifelines in a world that rushed past. She didn't need him to say thank you. She didn't need anyone to notice. But someone did. And on the morning when her wedding invitation arrived from a stranger with no return address, Clara had no idea that 6 quiet years of unthanked breakfasts were about to turn into something the entire town would never forget. Clara never knew his name. For nearly 6 years, the man at the bench remained a quiet figure, in the rhythm of her mornings, constant, like the rising of dough or the scent of cinnamon in the air. He was always there before she arrived and never stayed long after she left. It was as if he only existed in that sliver of time between dawn and the first bus pulling up. His presence didn't demand attention, but Clara noticed everything. The way he kept his coat buttoned, even in spring, as if hiding from a chill that no season could thaw. How he never reached for the food while she was watching, but always left the napkin behind the next day, folded precisely in half, almost like a ritual. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind was still and the streets were silent, she'd see him glance toward her as she turned to leave. Not with desperation, not even gratitude, just acknowledgement, as if to say, I see you too. She imagined his name often. James, Walter, Samuel. Once she called him Mr. Brooks in her mind for a whole year, but in truth she didn't need to know who he was to care about him. That was the point. But one cold December morning, something shifted. Clara arrived early, the sky still draped in indigo. She left a slice of cranberry orange loaf, a hot cup of dark roast, and a note that simply read, wishing you warmth. She turned to walk back, but this time he spoke. His voice was low and cracked with disuse. You ever get tired of doing this? She froze. Not because she was startled, but because she never expected to hear his voice. Slowly she turned back. No, she said quietly. Do you ever get tired of accepting it? He gave the smallest smile, a twitch really, then nodded once and said, no one's asked me that in a long time. That was the only conversation they ever had. From that day forward, Clara noticed subtle changes. He started sitting straighter. His coat, though still old, looked cleaner. A new pair of gloves appeared on his hands. Nothing dramatic, just small signs of someone remembering how to take up space in the world. Then on a rainy Tuesday in February, Clara left a scarf beside his breakfast, a woolen one her mother had knitted years ago. It was her favorite, fraying at the ends, but still warm. When she returned the next morning, the scarf was gone. In its place, a note scribbled in shaky pencil on the back of her own napkin. Thank you for seeing me as a person. Clara folded that note and placed it in her wallet. She carried it with her from that day on. It became a kind of compass, a reminder that kindness didn't need to be grand to matter. Still, she never asked his name. She never pressed. People carry their reasons for silence, like scars they're not for others to peel back. She respected that. But the mystery deepened 2 weeks before her wedding. She found an envelope tucked under the bakery's back door. No postage, no return address. Just her name, Clara Bennett, written in tight, deliberate script. Inside was a single card. Tomorrow I will come, not for cake, but to honor a debt. The message made her pause. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't sentimental. It felt formal, military even. Clara showed it to no one, not even Nathan. But deep in her bones, she knew who had sent it. She just didn't know what debt he was talking about. On the day of her wedding, as she stood in the bride's room, adjusting her veil, she glanced out the window and saw him, the man from the bench, standing near the church entrance, looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit that had clearly been pressed by hand. His shoes, though worn, had been polished to a dull shine. His silver hair was combed, his posture straight. She had never seen him like that, never seen him whole. And yet even then, even as the whispers among guests started to ripple, who is that? Why is he here? Clara didn't hesitate, because she didn't need to know his full story to understand one thing. This man had once been someone the world saluted, and somehow the world had forgotten. But she hadn't. And when she gathered her dress and ran toward him, tears in her eyes, she did not see a stranger. She saw the echo of every invisible person society had ignored. She saw her father. She saw a man who had survived something unspeakable and was still standing. She didn't yet know that his name was Victor Hale, a retired Marine sergeant, that he had saved lives in Fallujah, that he had vanished after losing his wife and daughter in a car accident, too broken to be called a hero. She didn't know any of that. All she knew was that for 6 years he had shown up, and now so had she. The church was already humming with quiet chatter when Clara arrived, her gown trailing behind her, like ripples on still water. Her hair was pinned delicately with sprigs of lavender, her bouquet a soft blend of lilac and cream roses. It should have been a moment of pure focus, a bride preparing to walk toward her future. But Clara's eyes weren't on the altar. They were on the entrance. He was there. The man from the bench, Victor, though she still didn't know his name, stood just inside the doorway, framed by the morning light. He looked out of place and completely dignified all at once. His faded gray suit had been pressed with care, the cuffs neatly folded. His hands, rough and vain, clutched an envelope. His shoes were old but polished to a shine that could only have come from hours of effort. And though his frame was slightly hunched, he stood tall. Whispers rippled through the church pews. Who invited him? Is that the guy from the bus stop? You've got to be kidding me. You didn't actually invite him, did you? Clara heard it all. Every hushed voice, every sideways glance. And she didn't care. Without a word to her bridesmaids or the photographer or the wedding planner, who had just raised a panicked hand, Clara gathered her skirt in both hands and walked no ren down the aisle straight to the man no one else seemed to understand. Gasps filled the church as she wrapped her arms around him, holding tight as if anchoring him to the moment. Her mascara began to run, and the carefully set curls at her temple loosened. But none of that mattered. "I still remember your eyes," she whispered. "The first morning in winter. You looked so tired." Victor didn't answer right away. But when he did, his voice was clearer than she had imagined. "I remember the muffin," he said. "Blueberry, warm. I hadn't tasted kindness in months." Clara smiled through her tears. The church had gone silent. All eyes were on them. And then the doors opened again. A sharp gust of air swept through the aisle, catching the edge of Clara's veil. 12 Marines in full-dress blues marched in with synchronized precision. The rhythm of their boots against the stone floor echoed like thunder. Each uniform was immaculate: white gloves, polished metals, sharp creases. The lead Marine, a tall man with a chest full of ribbons and the nameplate Duncan, stepped forward. The crowd parted as the formation moved toward Clara and Victor. With practiced timing, the Marines raised their arms and delivered a crisp, unified salute, not to a general, not to a commanding officer, but to Clara Bennett, the town's quiet baker. Captain Duncan broke formation and addressed the congregation, his voice firm yet reverent. "On behalf of Alpha Company 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, we are here to honor the woman who, without ever knowing it, sustained one of our own through the hardest chapter of his life." He turned and gestured to Victor, who stood stunned beside Clara. "This is Sergeant Victor Hale," Duncan continued. "He saved 9 Marines during an ambush in Fallujah in 2004, including myself. He returned for more, even after taking shrapnel to the leg. His bravery earned him a Silver Star, one he never claimed." A hush fell over the church. Captain Duncan held up a framed shadow box inside a medal and an old photograph. The image showed a younger Victor, bloodied, carrying a Marine across a debris-littered street. Behind him, a younger Duncan, barely conscious, clung to life. "If not for this man," Duncan said, voice thick with emotion, "I would not be here. And if not for Clara Bennett, Sergeant Hale might not have survived to remind us all what quiet valor looks like." Clara's breath caught. She looked at Victor, whose eyes had filled with tears. "I never knew," she whispered. "That was the point," Victor replied softly. "I didn't want gratitude. I just needed to feel human again. And you gave me that." A bridesmaid stepped forward, dabbing her tears with her bouquet. "I work with Clara," she said to the room. "She never told any of us. She'd come in early, buy ingredients with her own money, and leave those breakfasts without fail." Another co-worker followed her, voice shaky with shame. "We teased her. We didn't get it. Now I do." Captain Duncan turned toward Clara once more. "In the Corps, we have a rule: never leave a Marine behind. Clara Bennett lived that rule without ever wearing the uniform." A beat of silence passed. Then the guests stood, all of them, not out of politeness, not because they were told to, but because they suddenly understood they were standing in the presence of something extraordinary. Nathan, her groom, stepped forward. He extended his hand to Victor. "Sir, it would be our honor if you would walk Clara down the aisle." Victor hesitated, then nodded. He took Clara's hand in his, and together they walked forward, not just toward marriage, but toward a new story, written not in vows alone, but in years of unseen compassion, finally brought into the light. The wedding made headlines in small-town newspapers across Oregon and then beyond. A photo of 12 Marines saluting a tearful bride in a lace gown was shared across social media, picked up by local news, and eventually made its way into national military circles. But Clara Bennett didn't notice the attention. She was too busy living the kind of life that didn't ask for applause. She and Nathan delayed their honeymoon by a week, not because they couldn't afford it, but because Clara had an idea, and once she had an idea, she followed it through. They used their wedding gift money to open the Hearth Bench, a small breakfast program run from the church's fellowship hall. Every morning from 6:00 to 8:00 a.m., volunteers served hot coffee, homemade pastries, and warm meals to homeless veterans and anyone else who needed to sit, eat, and be seen. There were no intake forms, no ID checks, and no conditions. Just a long wooden bench carved by a local craftsman with words etched into the backrest, feeding one person can nourish a life the world forgot. At first they had only 3 regulars, 2 older men and a younger woman who never made eye contact. But word spread quickly. By the 3rd week, the fellowship hall was full. Victor never returned to the bench. Clara didn't expect him to. He had done his part. She assumed with some quiet sadness that he had retreated into the life of solitude that had once defined him. But she was wrong. One morning a letter arrived with no return address, just a postmark from Arizona. Inside was a postcard showing red rock canyons and a line of handwriting that Clara immediately recognized. Every breakfast is a salute. Thank you. V.H. A month later, another arrived from Montana, then one from Virginia. Each note came from a different place, always with the same message. Clara began tacking them to the bulletin board in the kitchen. She never told the volunteers who the sender was, but they began calling it the Wall of Gratitude. Captain Duncan visited once a month. He and several of the Marines from the wedding returned in civilian clothes, quietly blending in with the others. They didn't come to be recognized, they came to serve. They rotated shifts, ladled soup, washed dishes, and chatted with the guests. One morning, Duncan brought a young recruit and told him, "This is what it means to carry the code off the battlefield." Victor, as Duncan later shared, was finally receiving treatment from the VA, counseling, medical care, a clean place to sleep. He was also helping other veterans navigate the system, men like him who had slipped through the cracks. "He's not just surviving now," Duncan said. "He's leading again." Clara kept baking just as she always had. She still arrived at 4:30 a.m., still tied on her apron with quiet focus. But now when she walked out the door at 5:15 a.m., she didn't leave food on the bench. She walked into a room full of stories, full of forgotten souls slowly being remembered. The Hearth Bench was no longer just a table. It was a reminder that unseen kindness, practiced consistently, can echo louder than any parade or medal ceremony. That transformation doesn't always start with a speech or a spotlight. Sometimes it starts with a muffin and a napkin note that simply says, "Still here, still baking." Clara Bennett never sought recognition. She never imagined her quiet mornings, the soft kneading of dough, the gentle wrapping of pastries, the careful crafting of notes would one day ripple outward to touch so many lives. But sometimes the smallest acts of kindness become the loudest voices in a silent world. The Hearth Bench stands now as more than just a place to eat. It's a sanctuary, a symbol of respect, a gathering where the invisible are seen, where the broken are made whole again through warmth, food, and a simple acknowledgement of their worth. On the wall behind the serving counter hangs the very first note Victor ever left for Clara. "Thank you for seeing me as a person." Beneath it, Clara added her own message. Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing. There's a profound lesson here that heroism often isn't loud or public. It doesn't always come with medals, marches, or speeches. Sometimes it's the quiet consistency of showing up, of offering a hand without expecting a handshake that changes the course of a life. Victor's story reminds us that beneath worn coats and tired faces are chapters of courage, sacrifice, and hope waiting to be told. And Clara's unwavering kindness teaches us that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and honored not just for what they did, but for who they are. When people ask Clara why she kept going, why she kept feeding a man she barely knew, she smiles softly and says, "Because no one should ever feel invisible." This story of Clara and Victor holds timeless lessons that resonate deeply in today's fast-paced world, especially here in America, where independence and kindness both matter. In our busy lives, it's easy to overlook those who quietly struggle, the invisible among us, much like Victor once was. Yet as Clara showed us, true compassion requires no grand stage, only a willing heart and consistent action. For many of us, this tale is a reminder that every person, no matter their circumstance, deserves dignity and respect. It challenges us to ask, how often do we pause to really see those around us? How often do we let judgments cloud our kindness? And perhaps most importantly, how can we embody Clara's quiet strength in our own daily lives? Whether it's helping a neighbor, listening with patience, or simply acknowledging someone's worth with a smile, small gestures ripple far beyond what we imagine. This story encourages us all, especially those of us who have walked through life's storms, to be the light that others may need but never ask for. We would love to hear from you. What moments have you experienced where kindness made a difference? How do you practice compassion in your community today? Please share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Your voice could inspire others to see the unseen and honor the quiet heroes in our midst. Thank you sincerely for listening to the story. If it touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Together we can build a community that celebrates kindness, dignity, and the strength found in simple, everyday acts. Stay well, stay kind, and remember sometimes the smallest acts hold the greatest power.